It's another Monday. It's another roll to roll. I'm Benj,
I'm Chase.
I'm Dave.
and today we're doing a couple other short, well, not short shows, but single topic shows related to character building. Before we get into the meat of what your character is, that being the classes. So today we're going to talk about skills and abilities. Dave, how do you pay the bills?
You pay the bills typically with skills. As a character in D&D, you have a bunch of skills. Real quickly, skills in 5th edition have changed. They're now like basically ability checks with specialization. You don't get skill points every level and put them in 4 or 5 skills and bump them up to high ranks. They're based off of your proficiency bonus, which I think we've mentioned a couple times, but I don't think we've really gotten into what that is. It's kind of your all around, your base attack bonus, your skill bonus, your spell attack bonus, and spell save DC, all rolled into one stat that goes up every. Is it every 5 levels it goes up?
4 or 5, yeah.
Yeah,
It's four or
every
five.
4 or 5 levels. It starts at +2 and it tops out at, I think, +6.
Yep.
And you add that to basically everything you're proficient with. So every attack with a weapon with proficiency, every skill you're proficient with, every saving throw you're proficient with. Um,
Basically everything you know how to do.
Yeah, everything you know how to do is tied to that, and that takes a bunch of disparate things from 3rd edition and kind of puts them into one system so that you don't have to manage a bunch of different numbers all over the place. It's all tied to just kind of one number, which I think is really cool. The other thing they did that's pretty cool is they flat out mention in skills that you can use skills with different abilities. They're all tied to a certain ability, but at your DM's word that I can't think of,
Discretion.
discretion, thank you guys. At your DM's
Yeah,
discretion, you can throw a different ability in there if it makes sense. For example, if you're doing like an intimidate check, it's normally charisma, but you can word it as like, I'm like banging my shield with my hammer and like just, showing off my strength. And you can be like, all right, we'll roll it with your strength instead of your charisma because you're not really using your charisma, you're just showing how big and powerful you are. Kind of cool things like that that make the skill system a bit more flexible. So like we said, your skills are just ability checks that you add your proficiency bonus to. They've also pared down the skill list quite a bit from 3rd edition, which I think is a good thing. 3rd
Yeah.
edition had like
Use
all
rope.
of the skills, everything you could
It's
possibly think of
I
had a skill
counted them
tied
before
to
the
it.
show. It is
Uh,
45. Third
45 in 3rd
edition,
edition.
the player's handbook has 45 skills listed for 3rd edition. The 5th edition player's handbook has 18.
Yeah, they did that by combining several skills together. Like they took your tumble, your balance, anything that's like a Dexy skill, and they threw it all in acrobatics. It's all acrobatics. The same thing with like climb and jump, and I think swim. They're all athletics checks.
Yep.
So it kind of smooth things down. You don't have to look at this huge list of skills and be, especially for new players. Like the first thing that threw me off with 3rd edition when I started playing it was the huge list of skills and figuring out what my class could use, what I needed to take, having to read through all the skill descriptions of what they did, then try and figure out if they were useful or not. And then 3rd edition also had skill synergies, where if you had 5 ranks in this skill, you got a +2 to this skill, and it was ludicrous. And 5th edition, again, in its kind of vein of simplifying things, making it easier to get into, making it easier to just go and play, pare that all down. Like Ben said, it's 18 skills. They're all tied to different stats. Constitution does not have a skill tied to it. I don't think it. No, 3rd edition had your concentration,
And it
but
still
other
is used for concentration checks. They just don't call it a skill.
right. It's just a. Is it just a flat con save?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, plus your proficiency bonus if you're proficient, but that's a whole other story that's mainly for casters.
So yeah, there's the 18 skills, all tied to different abilities, and
I was about to say, one thing I wanted to add to it with the whole simplifying and making things smaller than what they used to be in previous editions is one of the other things they did is they took a bunch of the skills that were like very, very specific, like use rope or pick lock, and just gave you an item for it now. So now you have thieves tools instead of the skill, and you just become proficient in thieves tools, and you use your thieves tools for it instead of the
right.
skill.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about putting points in open lock and disable device and use
Yeah,
magic device. It's all thievery tools.
right.
And The same thing with craft. There's no craft skill. It's all based off of your proficiency with blacksmithing
Tinker's tools.
tools or
Yeah,
tinker's tools or whatever it may
yeah.
be. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was one thing I wanted to add about how another way they went about making the skills easier to grasp without overloading players. Because I can tell you from a DM perspective, one of the other problems I run into is players take a bunch of skills thinking that's going to be useful and never actually talking to you. And this might be just me or any DM out there, and realize that your DM maybe never will even ask you to ever use that skill, or it comes up so rarely in the campaign. Like, like if you're doing a undead slaughter campaign, like say your campaign started and the village is under siege by undead, and the ranger takes animal handling. As a DM, I would try to be like, you're never going to use that skill.
Yeah.
All the animals are dead. So something along those lines is another idea that you need to think about too. Is what skills will actually be useful for the campaign you are running.
So
not
Chase,
just what sounds cool.
As our resident game master, or the guy we go to for those questions, talk to me about when you would call for a skill check and what all is involved in that.
Sure. Well, first things first, I'm breaking into two parts. There's the individual player skill check, and then there's a party skill check or a contest. Goes into that. We'll do that one second. Let's focus on the individual first. So for an individual, I hate to use not really an obvious one, but a common one. But the most common class, I'll say it this way, that I feel gets asked for skill checks a lot is the party rogue.
Absolutely.
I always feel like the party rogue is going to be asked for these more than any, so I'm going to use them for the example, because I can come up with a full example where I'd ask for multiple across the board. So, one of the things that the rogue is almost always asked to do is sneak ahead and scout out. Sneak ahead and sneak into the dungeon and let us know how many goblins are in there. Sneak into the bandit camp and let us know what they got going on. See if you can find any traps, whatever. So the rogue sneaks in. So, okay, I want to sneak in. Okay, well, I need a stealth check. Let's see how well you are sneaking in. Okay, they roll. I take the number. I put it against the DC of everyone that might see them and say, okay, you make your roll. Keep going. All right, what's the first thing you want to do? Well, I see the big barred door, so I need to know if I can get into it. So I kind of like push it open a little bit. Okay, it doesn't budge. So give me I need to check it. So let me see if it's locked. Let me check for traps. And that's when they would use their thieves tools to check for that. And then they might just want to barely crack it open and do like a little roll in and not be noticed. I might say, okay, well, give me an acrobatics check to do that and not be noticed. And the list just kind of keeps going from there. Oh, when I come across the door, there's immediately a guard there, but they don't see me. But I notice that they have the horn that could sound the alarm on their waist. What can I do to grab that? Okay, give me a sleight of hand check to grab that horn off of them without them noticing. And it just keeps rolling. And just to give some other examples, that's not a rogue. Sometimes the bard may be trying to actually calm down a potential fight by kind of talking to the hobgoblins and being like, hey, we don't want to fight you. We have this money we can pay you instead and send us on our merry way. So I might have them roll a charisma check for persuasion, or maybe they're, trying to, joke their way out of it. So I might have them give me a performance check. And then in the case of maybe a giant boulder's falling down about to crush the party, the fighter can make an athletics check to try and shoulder check it out of the way. Every class has a good chance to use them. What gets real interesting is what leads into the second part, which is when the entire party needs to do something. So, and like my current campaign is a seafaring campaign, so like they all need to sail the ship away. They all have their different position aboard the ship, and they need to get it away from the enemy ship that's trying to catch up to them.
And so none of us are trained to do it.
Yeah, so I'll give them party checks or contests to see how well they get away. So I'll say, okay, everyone roll a check, and essentially I compare winning DCs to failed DCs, and whichever I have the most of, then we're fine. So if I set the DC, which for you non-DMs out there, the DC is essentially the difficulty of how something is to do. So how hard it is in perspective to the number on a dice. So I might say that it has a DC of 10, and I get 3 12s and 2 5s. Okay, well, the 3 12s went, they got it, they're off, they're sailing away just a little bit faster. Another common one I do is survival checks. Because, hey, something that your party's going to do is go through terrain a lot. Random terrain out in the wilderness where random encounters can happen. So I'll say, hey, you guys got to let me know, one, how fast you're traveling. So give me those survival checks to see how well you're navigating through this terrain. And then the other part of the survival check might be to say, well, you know what? There's a really big dragon in those woods. Let's see if they know to steer clear of those really big footprints, and just things like that. And it's a group check, and I base the success on the whole party. So that way, if the one person rolls a 1 and everyone else rolls, higher than a 15, I can just be like, yeah, he's a little noisy, but essentially you guys all run up to that one player, you're like, hey, shh, stop singing. You don't need to sing right now. Hush your mouth. Come on. And then you escort them along. Or, hey, there's roots right there. Stop tripping over every root in the forest. But, so, without going too much into too much more rambling, that's essentially, as the DM, when and why you would use things like that, and how to break them up in between. Does one person need to roll for it? Does everyone need to roll for it? And you can do in betweens. So maybe it's just a check for 2 people to make if 2 people are just trying to stealth into the camp. But you can break it up as needed. But I just recommend that when you're doing it for a big group, to do it as a contest instead of just trying to do every single person individually. It just gets too complicated.
And I have a quick question if we can throw into this for you. Because you can also use just straight ability checks, when do you use ability checks versus a skill check? Like, I'm sure some people will be questioning, do I use a skill to do this, or is it just a straight ability check?
I think the most common one for that one that I personally use, and again, other DMs out there, I am not the one-stop shop for all things DM knowledge, so please feel free to disagree. That is perfectly okay. But what I most of the time use them for is intelligence checks. And that's mainly because of what the intelligence are broken into, which, to get into that a little bit, intelligence essentially has knowledge arcana, knowledge history, knowledge nature, knowledge religion, and there's also investigation, but that's not really like an actual knowledge. But so sometimes my characters would be like, hey, what would I know about this thing? And I'll be like, well, it doesn't really fall under history. It doesn't really fall under religion or nature, and it kind of just doesn't fall into a group. So I'll say, you know what? Like, they might... Oh, good example. In the campaign I'm running, Seafaring campaign, there's minor black powder devices. So a player might ask me, what do I know about these types of cannons? And sometimes, depending on how they ask the question, I might say history. Or if it's a magical enchanted cannon, I might say arcana. But when it's just like a base question, I'll say, you know what, just give me a straight intelligence check. Just flat out what you might know about it. And then just have them roll. Some other times, conversations might come up where they're not really trying to persuade or deceive a person. They're trying to just talk to them. And I might say, roll a charisma check to let me just, see how this conversation goes.
Just a general reaction kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's essentially what I would say I use it for the most. It's where what you're trying to do should involve a check, but it's too general of a thing or too outside of what 5th edition gives you to have an exact roll for it.
If I might make a suggestion for something like that, if I'm interacting with a non-player character or something, maybe I do get to roll that as a persuasion check. But if there's somebody that I'm not interacting with who is witnessing the interaction, maybe that's just a charisma check to see how they, because I'm not trying to persuade them, but they're seeing me how I'm talking to another character, and maybe that's a straight charisma check to see how they feel about me as a person. Like if I'm haggling with the boatswain, right, and I'm doing a persuasion check to try to talk him down, and say the boatswain's boss is over, like, watching him, get in trouble for bargaining with me when he's not really probably supposed to, maybe I make a charisma check against him for him to say, well, this is probably just how he is. He's not really trying to get away with anything or whatever,
Right. I've actually used something similar to that before, where I think essentially the party was talking to the barkeep, but the barkeep wasn't the person who obviously runs the bar. So their persuasion check was against the barkeep, or the bartender, I should say, the bartender. And the actual keeper of the bar was off in the corner listening into the conversation. And I was just behind the screen just rolling for him the whole time the party was talking, just like, okay, that's what he thinks about that, that's what he thinks about that. So I've used something similar to that before. But yeah, that's a really good way to do it.
Cool. And that's another thing that I really, really like about the way they've done skills in 5th edition. In 3rd edition and in Pathfinder, if you were untrained in the skill, you may not be able to use it. Like, there were specific skills that you were not allowed to use untrained. I'm just looking at the list, and one of those was like read lips. If you're not trained in how to read lips, or you haven't practiced that, you're not necessarily going to be able to figure out what someone is mouthing while they're whispering over in the corner. But in 5th edition, everything is an ability check. And the only time it becomes a skill check is if I'm actually proficient in that skill. So, for example, every character has a strength score. I could walk up to you and shove you. And depending on how strong I am versus how strong you are, you may move or you may not. But if I'm proficient in athletics, which is the skill you use when you're shoving another creature, I just know how to shove people. Maybe I've trained in judo, and I know how to use my body weight or whatever. And then it becomes a strength athletics check. So I don't have to be trained in judo to shove you, but it helps. I don't have to be trained in history. I may have just heard something somewhere. You know, I'm a man of the world. I sit in taverns. I listen to other people talk. So I might make a general intelligence check because I haven't studied history, just to see if I remember having heard that information somewhere.
Right.
And that's one of those things that I really, really like about this, is that I can actually use every skill, whether I am practiced or trained in it or not. And I like that.
And to go with that, I was going to say, you know, as a DM, and again, internet, feel free to disagree, but it's kind of nice that any player can make any role, because honestly, though the DM may have his little DM screen and try to keep things secret, because when he's playing the NPC, you know, because the NPC doesn't want you to know the thing or doesn't want you to achieve the thing. But I think pretty much any DM you ask wants the players to find that secret bit of knowledge, because they spent the time writing it, they spent the time creating it. They want you to find it. You know, they want you to see what's behind that secret door. They want you to get the information out of that NPC. So yeah, exactly. I like the fact that any person can at least try. You might not succeed, but you can try.
And that's another good subject for another day for us to talk about, the relationship between the game master and the players, and how each should see the other. Because I think, I've been playing for a long time, and I know that some relationships haven't been great, and others have been really, really good. So, you know, that's
also real quick. I think I was fudging some words earlier, so just to apologize for any confusion. So contests are an actual thing in 5th edition. Essentially, a contest is just a way of describing what we were talking about earlier, where it's a roll between two different things. So whether it's a player rolling against a DM NPC or a player rolling against another player, so if you read the actual player's handbook, that's what it describes as a contest. In the player's handbook, it describes the group thing I was talking about earlier as a group check. So just so I make sure I don't confuse any people, when I was talking about a group contest, it's the same thing as a group check, and a contest is actually just the going against, you know, a roll off against two different people or multiple people. So,
like if I'm trying to shove you and you don't want me to knock you down.
Yeah.
We would both roll strength checks or athletics checks if one of us was proficient, and then compare those numbers.
Right. Oh, I almost forgot too. One other really important thing that's very different about 5th edition compared to previous editions. So in older editions, you know, multiple people could make the same check. So, you know, the party could run up and be like, we're going to all try to push this boulder, and essentially everyone would make a roll. One cool thing that 5th edition has is the work together mechanic, which is just flat out, let's say Dave had a character or Benj had a character, and the other character was like, hey, you know, you're having a hard time with that. My character assists him. The mechanic now is just, you just roll 2 die and take the higher. So you have what's called advantage on the roll, and that it's just a really quick, faster way of making that happen, and still pretty much increasing your chances of getting a higher number that's going to pass the DC you need anyway.
Right. Well, it used to be that you would both roll, and if your character who was helping got better than a 10, then he helped, and the person actually trying to do the thing got like a +2 bonus. Yeah. But as we've talked about previously, rolling with advantages is much better than a +2 bonus, because it's statistically like adding 5 to the roll. And I like that too. And it simplifies it. I don't have to remember again the floating modifiers. It's just roll two, take the good one.
Yep. But that's all I got now. I will stand away from the podium.
Cool. Dave, you got anything else about skills?
No, I think we pretty well covered everything.
Without further ado, I guess I'll wrap it up. I'm Benj.
I'm Chase.
I'm Dave.
Keep on rolling.